By the time the bell was close enough to sound like it was hanging just behind her spine, Bella's lungs were barely working. Rain hammered the canopy so hard that the whole forest seemed to be made of water and noise. The stream at her feet had blurred into a silver smear. The rocks beneath its surface were invisible, treacherous. She did not see half of them. She only felt them slam into her shins, slide out from under her boots, twist her ankles as she ran. The bell rang again, hard, metallic, an ugly, urgent sound. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, bounding off wet trunks and fog. Each ring arrived a half-second too late, like a step out of rhythm with her own. "Dad!" She gasped into the phone, pressed against her ear. "Dad! Please!" Her father's voice crackled through the tiny speaker, distorted by her ragged breath. "Stay on the stream," he shouted. "Stay on the stream. I'm coming. I'm on the path. Belle, I'm on the path." She wanted to ask how far. She wanted to ask if he could hear the bell too, if she was already losing her grip on reality. But there wasn't any air for questions. There was only enough air to live, and not much of that. Behind her, branches snapped in short, decisive bursts. The bell chimed again. Clong, 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 each impact accompanied by an image she could not stop picturing. A hand, pale and wet, swinging a heavy brass bell just in front of its chest, eyes fixed on her back. "Dad? I can't," she managed, and then she slipped. Her feet went out from under her. The world turned into mud and rock and cold. Her teeth cracked together as she hit, the phone jerking sideways. For one terrible heartbeat, she thought she had lost it, that it had flown into the stream and vanished. The bell chimed once more, much louder now. Bella snatched blindly at the dark and found plastic. She clenched the phone so hard her hands spasmed around it, rolled, shoved herself upright, and kept running. It had not always been like this, she thought, in some stunned, detached corner of herself. The forest had not always been a mouth closing around her. Once it had felt like home. The town was technically in France, though it barely felt like a town at all. A handful of houses clustering around a church, a bakery that opened and closed on the owner's mood, a bar where the same 5 old men occupied the same 5 stools every evening. Beyond that, there were only fields, then trees, then mountains. Bella's parents had chosen their house for those trees. It sat just outside the town, a low, square place with green shutters and a front yard that always looked like someone had just walked through it. Behind the house ran a narrow, grassy path that eventually disappeared into the forest. If you stayed on it, it would take you, lazily and indirectly, toward a lake. Calling it a lake was generous, her father always said. It had been carved out by machinery decades before, fed by a river that wound through the valley and then diverted briefly, as though taking a breath, to fill a wide, still basin. But to Bella, it had never felt man-made. It was simply there, blue and self-possessed, ringed by pines and the faint smell of algae. The border between water and forest felt as honest and permanent as anything in her world. The geography was stamped into her from childhood. You left the back door, walked along the narrow path that followed a trickling stream. For a while, the path and the stream stayed together, and it was easy. Then the path began to lean away, wandering northwest, rising and falling over shallow hills until it bent hard to the west. At that corner, the stream had already vanished into a thicker tangle of trees. Most people, presented with that bend, took the path. It was the only thing that looked like a human decision. Bella and her father had discovered years earlier that you could leave it if you cut into the forest just before the bend and were willing to shoulder through dense undergrowth, if you trusted that the terrain would eventually begin to slope downward and the sound of water would return, You could meet the stream again where it had carved itself deeper into the land. From there, you could follow it north. It was not a simple walk, and that was what she loved about it. The forest floor dipped and rose unpredictably. Sometimes the stream flowed at your feet. Other times it had dropped into a narrow ravine, and you had to follow its echoes from above. There were dense thickets of hazel and bramble, sudden clearings full of bracken, stands of fir so closely spaced they turned the world into pillars and shadow. If you lost the stream sound for too long, you could lose everything, end up circling yourself, walking in gentle, meaningless loops while the river remained somewhere else entirely. Bella had never gotten lost. From the time she could keep up with his stride, her father had brought her into the woods. He had taught her to note landmarks, the birch with a lightning scar, the moss-covered boulder that looked like a sleeping animal, the way the ground softened underfoot when you were getting close to the river. When she was small, she thought of the forest as a maze only the two of them could solve. As she got older, that feeling hardened into something quieter, but more stubborn. These woods are ours, she would think, standing in a patch of sunlight in the middle of nowhere. Not literally, of course, but in every way that mattered. By 18, the forest had become the safe, unchanging counterpoint to everything else. Her life in the city, at university, felt like a puzzle with pieces missing. New friends with half-formed loyalties, professors who barely knew her name, blurry parties where she smiled too much and drank too little. There was always noise, always an electric hum of urgency around grades and internships, and futures she was supposed to be constructing. Coming home that June, hugging her parents in the driveway, she had felt some invisible muscle unclench. "First thing tomorrow," her father had asked, glancing past her shoulder toward the line of trees. "First thing," she had said. It wasn't. There were errands, extended family visits, the heavy inertia that always came with resettling into a house that still carried the outlines of her childhood. It was a few days before she woke one morning to a sky so cleanly blue it looked washed, and felt that pull in her chest again. No one else in the family loved the forest the way she did. Her mother enjoyed the idea of it and tolerated the insects. Her younger brother had long ago traded walks for screens. Only Bella and her father treated the path as a kind of private corridor, a hallway out of ordinary life. That morning, though, he was gone before she came downstairs. A note on the table, a line of his rushed handwriting, "Emergency call. Back this afternoon. Don't wait." She looked from the note to the trees visible through the kitchen window. She did not wait. The walkout felt like rewinding an old tape. Her boots remembered every shift in the ground. The damp smell of resin and earth seemed to reach up to meet her as she left the path and cut into the undergrowth. She brushed through ferns and young saplings, ducked beneath low branches that snagged at her hair, and tracked the subtle, downward tilt of the land until she heard it, the small, insistent rush of the stream. When she broke through the last curtain of leaves and saw the water, she found herself grinning. It was exactly as it had always been, narrow, fast, clear, threading around rounded stones, catching bits of sky. She crouched and plunged her hands in. The cold was almost painful after the warmth of her walks. For a moment, she simply watched her fingers distort beneath the surface, pale and strangely disconnected, like someone else's hands. That was when she heard the first chime. It was faint, far off, but unmistakable. A single, clean ring that didn't belong to the forest. Bella froze, arms suspended over the water, droplets falling from her knuckles. She listened. Silence except for the stream, the soft diffusion of wind overhead, the distant call of a bird. She almost let it go. Sounds traveled oddly out here, she knew that. A truck on the distant road could transform into a dull, unplaceable roar. A door slamming at a farmhouse could arrive as a cracked echo, impossible to assign to anything human. It might have been that. It might have been nothing. The second chime was longer and more insistent. It seemed to come from somewhere ahead, deeper into the forest, in the same direction she had planned to walk. Bella straightened slowly. A dog, she thought. Some hunter's dog with a bell on its collar. Farmers put bells on cows, didn't they? Why not on something smaller? The area was rural enough for that to make sense, except the bell sounded heavy. Not a tinkling collar. Something more substantial. The ring had weight to it, a resonant core that a little brass bauble couldn't produce. The third chime came on the heels of her thought. And a fourth. There was a rhythm to it now, the quick, careless cadence of someone shaking a bell without thinking about it, without needing it to mean anything in particular. Bella glanced back the way she had come. It would have been sensible to turn around. By her own memories, no one else ever came this way. The path was unmarked. The little detour through the undergrowth was something her father had only ever half-jokingly called our secret passage. The forest near the town had public trails with markers and little maps on wooden posts. This section did not. The bell rang again, brighter, a little closer. Her unease mixed, absurdly, with curiosity. It was the first sign in 18 years that she wasn't the only person who knew this route, that there was someone else, somewhere ahead, moving in roughly the same direction she wanted to go. She found herself stepping forward, following the stream. If it's a hunter and his dog, she thought, I'll see the orange vest or hear him swear before I get close. If it's someone from town, I'll recognize them. If it's anything else, well, there was nothing else. That was the whole point. The forest was safe, because it was empty. The bell kept up a scattered, almost impatient chiming for several minutes as she walked, then stopped abruptly. No diminuendo, no gradual dying away. One moment it was there. Clong, clong, clong. The next the world had snapped back to its usual sounds. The absence startled her more than the sound had. She stopped in mid-step, one foot on slick rock, the other half sunk into moss, and listened until her ears ached with effort. Nothing. Just the water and her own breath. She waited for her heartbeat to smooth out, then shrugged deliberately, as if to make the decision physical, to push away the prickle between her shoulder blades. There were 100 explanations that ended with another person somewhere in the trees. A herder moving cattle along some hidden trail, kids playing with some old bell they'd dragged from a shed, even some strange echo from a farmhouse she couldn't see. The forest had always been good at bending sound. Today, that was all it was. She started to walk again. 20 minutes later, she saw the animal. At first, it was only an interruption in the pattern ahead of her, a lump of brown in a world of green and gray. The forest was full of that kind of intimidation. Fallen branches, root balls, the hunched forms of well-placed stones. But as she drew closer, the shape resolved into something softer, with a familiar outline. It was lying on its side at the edge of the stream, in a disturbed patch of leaves. Its fur was dark and rain-flattened. Its body was intact, legs folded, claws curled slightly. The absence took a second longer to register. Where its head should have been, there was a clean, raw line. Bella stopped so abruptly that cold water sloshed into her boot. She did not notice. She was staring at the place on the animal's neck where skin became nothing. The cut was unnaturally straight, like the line where a piece of paper had been neatly torn and then pulled away. There were no ragged edges, no strings of flesh. Whoever had done this had used something sharp and had used it carefully. A badger, she realized belatedly. The stocky body, the pattern ghosting along its flanks, even without the distinctive face. She had seen them alive in the forest before, trundling with their odd, determined gait, snuffling at the ground. This one was still flexible when she nudged it gently with the toe of her boot. Its fur was wet, but not soaked through. There was a faint smell beginning to rise from the wound, sweet and wrong, but it had not yet become the full, choking reek of decay. It hadn't been dead long. The underside of her skin felt suddenly too tight, as if all her veins had contracted at once. Behind her, the stream went on talking as if nothing had changed. There were wild animals in the forest, of course. Foxes, feral dogs, things that had no particular reason to like badgers. Brothers of badgers even, who might kill for territory or food. But she had seen roadkill, the aftermath of dogfights, the scattered remains left by birds of prey. None of it looked like this. Nature did not cut straight lines and leave the rest of the body untouched. She thought of the bell. The sound had been moving in roughly the same direction she had. Upstream, north, the same vector. The timing wasn't exact, but it didn't need to be. Someone had been ahead of her, or to the side, in this same thin slice of forest. The bell had stopped somewhere around here. "Don't start," she muttered aloud, surprising herself with the sound of her own voice. She forced herself to look at the badger for another few seconds, taking in the details. The open curve of the wound, the way the front paws almost seemed to be reaching for something absent, the fact that there was no blood on the ground around it. Then she stepped around the body and kept going. The rational part of her brain laid out the facts calmly as she walked. Hunters used knives. Hunters sometimes used bells for animals. Hunters did not always clean up their kills properly or quickly. The forest did not belong to her. She did not get to decide what happened in it. The rest of her brain, the part that had gone hollow at the sight of that clean, careful absence where a head should be, stayed very quiet. She made it to the river, then the lake, as she always had. The water was as smooth as glass, darkening from blue to slate, as clouds drifted in front of the sun. She sat on a familiar rock with her arms wrapped around her knees, listening to the faint slap of tiny waves on the shore. On the way back, she deliberately took the wider path that avoided the stream, the one that curved lazily west instead of threading back through so much undergrowth. It added time, but it gave her markers. The fallen spruce, the exposed roots of the big oak, the place where the path climbed high enough to glimpse the town's steeple. She did not tell her mother about the badger. To her father that evening she said, "I thought I heard a bell out there today. Weird, right?" and laughed it off before he could ask questions. "It's not hunting season," he had said, frowning. "Probably just somebody with a cowbell on. Something." She had waved a hand vaguely, embarrassed by how quickly she wanted the conversation to be over. He gave her a long look, the kind that weighed what she was saying against what he knew of her. For a moment she thought he would push, ask how far she had gone, if she had seen anyone. Then her mother called from the kitchen, and the moment snapped. "If you go again," he said, picking up his keys, "take your brother or me." She promised she would. She did not keep that promise. The week that followed blurred in a way that made her restless. Old friends in town that she had less in common with now, grandparents to visit, a drip feed of news and questions about school. Most of the time she enjoyed it. Some of the time it made her feel like a guest in a life that used to be hers. There was rain on and off all week, the good, heavy kind that made the air smell clean. The day she decided to go back to the forest, the clouds had finally thinned, leaving a high gray film where the sky should have been. The forecast said showers, maybe a storm in the evening. Nothing dramatic. "If it gets bad, turn around," her mother said, rinsing coffee cups at the sink. "There's no reason to be out there in a thunderstorm." "I know." Bella slung her small crossbody bag over her shoulder, phone and keys inside. "I'll be quick. Just to the river and back." "What time's it now?" her father asked from the table. She checked the oven clock. 6. He raised his eyebrows. "Sun's at 9. Don't push it." "I won't." She leaned over to kiss his hair. "I know this walk, remember?" He made a noise that could have been amusement, could have been protest. She didn't wait to find out which. Outside, the air was cooler than it had been that morning, threaded with the metallic promise of rain. She zipped her jacket halfway and set off. The path along the stream was soft beneath her boots, the grass bent and glossy from the last shower. The trees on either side looked darker than usual, as if the lack of direct sun had solidified them. The water in the stream was higher too, running fast and cloudy. By the time she left the path and pushed into the forest, the first drops were falling again. They pattered gently at first, sliding down leaves and working their way into the undergrowth. The sound built with deceptive speed, the way applause filled a room, one pair of hands, then a dozen, then 100, blurring into a single roar. She reached the stream in just under an hour. The badger's body was still where she had seen it, off to the side in the damp leaves. In the uncertain light, it looked more like a collapsed shape than an animal. The fur had begun to slump. There was a darker stain around the neck now, and when she stepped closer, the smell rose to meet her, thick, cloying, full of the sick sweetness of decay. Flies lifted in a lazy cloud and then settled again. Bella covered her nose with the back of her wrist, swallowed against the reflex of her throat. The sight should have hardened the memory of the first trip, made it more sharply real, the cause and effect of bell and body linked. Instead, it only seemed to blur it. The scene was the same and not the same. The badger was both the animal she had seen last week and something new. She did not stop long. The rain intensified as she followed the stream northward. Her jacket, which had seemed sufficient when she left the house, was quickly overwhelmed. Water slid down the back of her neck, worked its way into her sleeves, soaked the cuffs of her jeans. The forest colors flattened as everything turned the same wet sheen. Thunder rolled somewhere distant, a low, grumbling sound that pushed through the constant hiss of rain. She instinctively glanced up, trying to see the sky through the overlapping crowns of the trees. It was like looking at the underside of an umbrella, dark with occasional lighter patches that meant nothing. She reached the river with the first real boom of thunder. It was louder here, amplified by the open channel and the exposed strip of sky above it. Lightning stayed politely hidden behind clouds, but the air had shifted, charged, unsettled. Bella turned to follow the river west, muscles moving on memory. After a minute or two, she stopped. Not far, she thought. If I go to the lake, it's 20 minutes there, 20 back to this point, then an hour home. That's too much. She checked her watch. Just after 8. An hour to sunset, less with the clouds. In dry weather, it would have been a mild calculation. In this, with her hair plastered to her head and her socks squelching, it felt more serious. She imagined trying to find the stream again in full dark. The forest's comforting landmarks turned invisible, every trunk a duplicate, every shadow more solid than the next. She had done short stretches at night before, walking home under stars or a full moon, but never like that. Never with the sky closed and the ground slick. The thought of turning back needled at the old stubbornness in her, the conviction that this route belonged to her, that it obeyed her in some small way. But another thought was louder. If she broke an ankle out here now, they might not find her until morning. She had not mentioned her plans to anyone beyond going for a walk. No details, no times. The image of her mother's face when they realized she was late flashed in uninvited. "Fine," she said aloud, mostly to herself, but also a little to the forest. "You win." She turned around and began retracing her steps. The storm matured quickly. By the time she reached the confluence where the stream met the river and started south, the rain had become a sheet. It made the world feel smaller. Everything beyond a few meters washed out into gray movement. Underfoot, the rocks of the stream were slick, hidden beneath muddy water that tried to turn everything into a single surface. She kept her head down to watch her footing. The noise was so complete that it almost became its own kind of silence, a universal hiss that filled her ears and left no space for distinctions. She was thinking about nothing more than the next step, the next placement of her foot, when she walked into the badger. It was like colliding with a heavy bag. The impact knocked her slightly backward. Something wet and soft slapped against the top of her head. A smell hit her a moment later, so thick and sour it felt like a physical thing forcing its way into her nostrils. She recoiled instinctively, stumbling sideways, one hand flying to her hair. The badger hung from a branch above the stream. Whoever had hung it had used some kind of cord or rope, looped around its body so that it dangled at roughly head height for someone of Bella's size. The animal had changed in the week since she'd last seen it. The fur was patchy, clumped together in places where moisture and rot had conspired. The body had swelled in odd areas, sagged in others. The head was no longer missing. It had been attached to the front paws. Somebody had taken the severed head and bound it there, muzzle pressed into the animal's own chest, as though it were clutching itself. The neck wound had been cinched tight with twine or wire. From a distance, the effect was almost neat, like a grotesque kind of bow. Up close, the wrapping had forced skin and flesh into bulging shapes, slick and discolored. The eyes had collapsed inward. The mouth hung slightly open, showing small, yellowed teeth. Bella stared at it, water and something else dripping from her hair onto her face. For a fraction of a second, her mind blanked so completely that there was nothing in it at all. Then everything came back in a rush. She made a sound that was half gag, half shouted curse. Her hands clawed at her hair, trying to scrape away whatever had smeared into it. Her fingers came away, coated in a thin, greasy film she could not see clearly in the dimness, but could feel, and that was somehow worse. She turned in a tight circle, looking wildly through the curtain of rain at the trees around her. The path she had taken to the river only an hour earlier had been clear. The badger's body had been on the ground then, still undisturbed. Now it was hanging like a warning or a joke directly in her way. It meant only one thing. Someone had been here in the short window between. Someone who knew she would pass this spot again. The skin on her arms lifted despite the damp. She realized she was shaking. The forest, which had always felt like a place that tolerated her, suddenly felt inhabited. But not by her. Bella stepped carefully around the dangling corpse, forcing herself not to flinch when it shifted slightly in the wind, swinging toward her. The smell followed her for several meters, as if clinging to her. She needed to be out of the trees. She needed sight lines, landmarks, anything that didn't feel like being inside a closed hand. The quickest way back to the safety of the path was to keep following the stream south, just as she had planned. At the point where the path bent west, it came closest to the water. That was where she'd arranged mentally to rejoin the world. She started to move faster. Her breath quickly turned harsh in her own ears, layered over the rain. Every shift of branches, every rustle of leaves, felt suddenly specific and meaningful, as if each were being made deliberately by something that had chosen its time. Half running, half speed walking, she dug her phone out of her bag with fingers that felt too big and clumsy. She almost dropped it twice before she managed to unlock the screen and stab at her father's name. He picked up on the third ring. "Belle?" Her voice came out as a broken thing. "Dad, don't hang up. I need you to meet me on the path. At the bend. Please, as fast as you can. There's someone out here." There was a beat of silence, and then his voice changed. All the lazy warmth bled out of it, replaced with something tight. "What do you mean, someone?" She tried to explain and couldn't. The words piled up in her throat: badger, hanging head, bell, but none of them wanted to form a sentence. "Just come," she said instead, her voice breaking. "Please." "Stay on the line," he said. "I'm coming right now." In the background, she could hear movement. The scrape of a chair, her mother's voice asking something. A moment later, her mother was on the line too, breathless. "What's happening? Where are you exactly?" "On the stream," Bella managed. She turned, orienting herself, trying to place her location on the mental map she had always carried. "I'm maybe 20 minutes from the bend. I don't know. It's so loud. Just come." "We're leaving," her mother said. "Stay with us. Don't stop walking. You know the way." They hung up on their end, but the line stayed open. The little green bar at the top of the screen told her they were still with her. She pushed the phone against her ear and kept moving. The storm did its best to drown everything. Sound became unreliable. Sometimes a crack of thunder would seem to come from directly above her head, even when the sky ahead showed no flash. Sometimes the forest would fall eerily quiet for a few seconds, the rain easing just enough that she could hear the crunch of her own footsteps, only for the noise to crash back in twice as loud. In that shifting disarray, the bell was almost impossible to place at first. It began as a faint, intermittent chime somewhere behind her, a metallic note that didn't belong to the natural chaos. For a few seconds, she thought it was some part of the storm. Wire in the wind, a stray piece of machinery near a farm. Then it rang again and again, irregular but insistent. Bella's heart stuttered, then raced. "It's there," she said into the phone, not sure she was being coherent. "The bell. It's here again." "What bell?" her mother demanded. "What are you talking about? I don't hear—" "I hear it," her father cut in. His voice had taken on an edge she had never heard before. "Far off. Just keep moving, Belle. We're close to the path now. I'm going in at the bend." Instinct told her not to look. Looking back would slow her down, cost seconds she didn't want to spend. But fear was tugging her in both directions, forward toward the imagined safety of her father's arms, backward toward the things she needed to see in order to know what she was running from. She compromised by half-turning, glancing over her shoulder while still in motion. At first there was nothing but curtains of rain and vertical lines of bark. Her eyes slid across them, incapable of picking out detail. Then, further down the strip of relative openness the stream had carved, where the undergrowth thinned and there was a bare patch of ground like a clearing, something moved. It stepped into that gap the way a figure might step through a doorway. Tall, was her first thought. Taller than her father. Taller than most of the men she knew. It was hard to tell where the coat ended and the body began. Everything was dark, either from fabric or shadow or both. The legs moved in a too long stride, covering the wet ground in deceptively easy steps. At its midsection, just in front of where its stomach would be, Its hands were moving. In them, something gleamed faintly with each jerk of motion. The bell. With every step it took, its hands drew the bell up and down, the clapper inside swinging and striking the metal. The sound arrived half a second later, bright and awful, piercing through the rain. Even at that distance, Bella felt absolutely certain of two things. The figure was looking directly at her, and it was not surprised to see her. Fear, which had been a rising line in her chest until then, spiked sharply upward. It was so intense that it felt almost like anger, like outrage at the fact that this could be happening at all. Some buried part of her loosened a knot and let something else out. She turned and ran. The world narrowed to points of contact. Boot to rock, rock to mud, mud to water. She did not think about where to place her feet, yet somehow they found purchase, more often than they slipped. Her breath tore at her throat. The bell kept ringing behind her, faster now, the rhythm messier, as though whoever held it was less interested in any pattern and more in sheer volume. "I'm on the phone with the police," she shouted into the trees. Her voice cracked halfway through. "They're waiting on the path. They're right there." She had no idea if the words carried far enough to reach the figure behind her, or if it would care. She said them for herself as much as anything, as if speaking them could make them real. On the phone, her mother was screaming her name between instructions. "Run, Bella, run! He's coming in from the bend. Your father's there. Run toward his voice. Do you hear me? Don't stop. Don't stop." She thought, if I look back and he's closer, I'm going to fall apart. I won't be able to keep going. So she did not look. Several times she stumbled hard enough that her knees hit the ground, stones tearing at the skin beneath her soaked jeans. Each time she was up again before she consciously decided to move, driven by the animal sense that stopping was not an option. Her bag, with its useless contents, began to drag at her shoulder. At some point, she realized the strap had slipped halfway off and was banging against her ribs with each step. The weight felt disproportionate, as if it were trying to pull her backward. She let it go. The strap slid down her arm and then was gone, thudding into the mud behind her. Without it, she felt lighter, even if it only changed the number in her head from impossible to slightly less impossible. The bell, impossibly, seemed closer now. It was no longer just behind her. Sometimes it sounded to one side, sometimes the other, as though whoever held it was not bound to the stream's path, the way she was, as if it could cut through the trees and meet her at whatever angle it chose. At some point, the rain thinned. Or maybe she simply noticed other sounds again for the first time. The crack and snap of branches breaking in a direction that roughly mirrored her own movement. Footsteps, she realized. Heavy ones. Whoever was behind her was not trying to move quietly. The thought came with icy clarity. He wants me to hear him. Her body did not care about his intentions. It cared only about survival. It kept her moving. Time stretched. She no longer knew how long she had been running. Her legs ached so intensely they had moved past pain into a kind of numb heat. Her chest felt raw, her mouth tasted like metal. Then, cutting through everything, the bell, the rain, the ripping of undergrowth, another sound reached her. Her name. "Bella!" It came from ahead, from the direction she had been aiming for unknowingly, pulled by the map in her muscles. It sounded like a rope being thrown across a gap. She tried to answer, and only managed a strangled noise. She tried again. "Dad!" He shouted once more. "I see you!" The relief that crashed through her almost undid her. Her knees weakened. She forced herself to keep going, driven by the knowledge that if she fell now, she might not get up again fast enough. The stream bed widened, rose slightly, and then the trees thinned. There, standing chest deep in the rain and mud, just where the path drew closest to the water, was her father. He had left the path entirely and come down the slope toward her. His hair was plastered to his head. His glasses were speckled. There was something in his face she had never seen before, a grief-stricken kind of fury as he reached out. Bella launched herself at him. He caught her, arms hard around her shoulders, and turned without stopping. Behind them, the bell rang again, a wild, clanging peal. She felt more than heard him swear under his breath. "What is that?" he shouted over the noise and her sobs. She clutched him harder instead of answering. They scrambled up the slope together and onto the path, where her mother was waiting, eyes wide, hands shaking around the car keys in her fist. The sound of the bell carried even here, more distant now, but still wrong. "What is that?" her mother whispered. "I don't know," her father said. His voice had gone flat. "We're leaving." They did not run so much as hurl themselves back toward the road. The path, which had always felt gentle, now seemed endless. The bell continued off to their left somewhere in the trees until the forest finally tightened around the sound and swallowed it. At the car, Bella collapsed into the back seat. Her whole body was trembling, not in neat shivers, but in big, jerky waves that made her teeth knock together. Her hair stuck to the headrest. The smell of rot clung to her, buried under wet earth and cold sweat. Her mother drove. Her father sat twisted in the passenger seat, half turned toward her, one hand still on her knee as if he could anchor her back to the present by sheer contact. In the background of their frantic questions and her broken answers, they kept coming back to one sentence, said more to each other than to her. "I heard the bell," her mother said, as if she had to state it out loud to make it real. "I heard it too," her father answered. Later, at the police station, their repetitions took on a different tone, not incredulous now, but trying to persuade. The officer on duty that night listened to their story with a face that became more and more carefully blank as it went on. He asked Bella to go through the events again, this time more slowly, filling in the details she had skated over in her panic. What time she had left the house, how long she thought she'd been walking before the storm, how far she believed she'd gone along the river, how she knew it was the same animal she had seen the week before. When she described the badger hanging from the branch, its head bound to its own front paws, the officer's hand tightened briefly around his pen. He wrote something down. "And the man?" he asked. "The figure with the bell. How close did you get to him?" Bella shook her head. Even in the bright fluorescent light of the small office, with her parents solid on either side of her, the memory of that shape in the clearing made the back of her neck prickle. "Not close. Maybe 40 meters? More? I don't know. It was raining. But far enough that I could see he was..." She searched for the right word and failed. "Big, taller than my dad, and he moved wrong." "Wrong how?" the officer asked, and she tried to describe it. The length of the stride, the way the upper body seemed to sway slightly, out of sync with the legs, as if some joint in the middle was loose or too flexible. The more she spoke, the more ridiculous she felt. Her throat tightened. "In the rain," the officer said finally, "with fear and darkness, the mind can misinterpret movement. It's a known thing." "So you think she imagined him?" her father asked sharply. The officer raised a placating hand. No. I think there was someone there. The bell, the animal, the display." He grimaced slightly. "That's all deliberate. It's just, we need to be careful with the details so we can look for an actual person, not a monster from a story. You understand?" Monster from a story. The phrase made Bella's stomach turn. She nodded anyway. They went from the station to the hospital, at the officer's insistence. The doctor on duty checked her pupils, cleaned and disinfected the scrapes on her knees and palms, listened to her chest. He pronounced her bruised, dehydrated, and exhausted, but physically fine. Shock will do this, he told her parents out in the corridor. Rest. Warm drinks. She'll feel worse tomorrow. Better the day after. Is there, her mother asked, voice low, someone like that? On record? Someone who hurts animals like that? The doctor sighed, the kind of weary breath that belonged to someone who had lived in a small town long enough to know too many of its secrets. There are always rumors. Someone living rough in the woods. Odd behavior. But nothing we can prove. The police will look. The following morning they did. A small team went out along the path Bella and her father described, then off it, down the slope to the stream. They followed it north, through the rain-flattened undergrowth, to the place where she thought she had collided with the hanging badger. There was no body. The branch she indicated, she found it again, tracing her steps, pointing with a hand that trembled only slightly, was bare. A few strands of dried something caught in the bark could have been fur or could have been moss. There was a rope, she said, or wire. Something. It was right here, swinging. I hit it. The officers spread out, combing the ground for any sign of where the rope might have been tied, for impressions in the wet soil from boots, any disturbed patch of leaves that might suggest dragging. The storm had been busy. It had torn leaves from branches, churned the top layer of earth and debris into a uniform mess. If there had been clear tracks, they were gone. They searched for the dropped bag as well. Bella retraced the frantic corridor of her flight as best she could, pointing out places that felt familiar, where she thought she might have let go. Nothing. No strap, no scrap of fabric. It was as if she had imagined carrying it at all. The bell did not ring that day. The only thing remotely out of place they found was discovered some distance from the stream itself, roughly along the line she would have taken, as she veered instinctively toward the path. It lay half hidden beneath a flat stone someone had placed carefully over it. A t-shirt. It was folded with uncomfortable precision, as though for a shop display. The stone held it in place and protected it from the worst of the rain. When the officer lifted the rock, the shirt underneath was only damp, not soaked. "Do you recognize this?" he asked Bella. She shook her head. It was a plain, gray thing, indistinguishable from dozens she had seen on market stalls and laundry lines. There was no brand visible, no slogan, nothing to tie it to anyone in particular. They bagged it and took it anyway. Back at the station, the officer who had taken their initial report laid out his conclusions in carefully chosen words. "There are clear signs," he said, "that someone else has been using that part of the forest. The animal, the shirt, your daughter's experience. It suggests someone who is not well, perhaps living rough, perhaps deciding that area is theirs." "You mean a squatter?" her mother asked, and something like that. "And you're going to find him," her father said. It was not a question. "We will patrol," the officer said. "We will advise people to avoid that sector until we know more. But you must understand, it is a very large forest. This person seems to know it well. We don't have infinite resources." He hesitated. "It may be," he added slowly, "that whoever it was simply wanted to scare her away, psychological intimidation." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the bell, the badger, the silent chase. It worked. She left. If he felt she was on his land, perhaps that is all he wanted. The anger that flashed across Bella's father's face then made him look suddenly like a younger man. "So the message is what?" he asked. We listen, we stay away, and he wins. The message, the officer said not unkindly, is that your daughter is alive. She ran when her instincts told her to run. You came when she asked. That is the part that matters. The rest we will deal with as we can. Bella sat quietly through this, twisting her fingers together so hard her knuckles whitened. The words about instability, about rough sleepers and territorial behavior, slid over her like water. None of them quite fit the image she had of the man in the clearing. When she closed her eyes now, she did not see a disheveled, desperate figure, some wild-haired hermit with a campfire and scavenged clothes. She saw the precise way the badger's head had been bound to its own paws, the ugly humor of the positioning. She saw the deliberate placement of that swinging body at exactly the height her own would meet it. She saw, ridiculously, but unshakably, the unhurried confidence of the stride as he had stepped into her path. He had not moved like someone afraid of being seen. He had moved like someone who believed, with good reason, that he had nothing to fear from anyone who did see him. The police did not find him. They patrolled for a few weeks. They posted a notice in the town hall recommending that people stick to marked trails and avoid going into the forest alone. Then other concerns needed their time. In the months that followed, there were no new reports. No more decapitated animals appeared by the stream. No more bells were heard. Of course, almost no one went into that part of the forest anymore. The hardest thing in the end was not the shock or the nightmares. It was the way the forest changed without changing at all. From the kitchen window, the tree line still looked the same. A steady, dark wall, the gentle rise and fall of hills behind it. On clear mornings, mist still pooled in the hollows. On windy days, the tops of the trees still bent in waves like a field. Nothing in that view hinted at the fact that Bella would not step into those trees again. She tried. Once, in late summer, after the worst of her immediate fear had dulled into something more abstract, she put on her boots and walked as far as the start of the path. The air smelled of dry grass and warm pine. A bird she could not see was singing something repetitive and cheerful. She stood there for a long time, hands clenched at her sides, arguing with herself. You know these woods, one part of her said. You allowed one person, one day, to take them away from you. Is that really who you want to be? Another part of her, the one that remembered the feel of her hair sticking to her skull with something other than rain, the thick, sweet reek of the badger's body. The way the bell had seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, replied more quietly. He is still there. Not necessarily the same man, or even a man at all, but the fact of him, the possibility of him, had soaked into every shadow. The forest could no longer be a place where nothing worse than getting lost could happen. It had revealed that it was capable of holding something else. She turned around and went back to the house. Her parents didn't object. They had never directly forbidden her from going into the forest again, but their entire bodies telegraphed relief when she stayed away. Her mother took to double-checking that the back door was locked at night, though nothing had ever suggested the man had any interest beyond his own territory. Her father installed a second, motion-sensitive light on the side of the house facing the trees. It flicked on sometimes in the small hours, triggered by nothing more frightening than a fox or a drifting branch, but each time it did, her parents both woke. In the city, when she went back to university in the autumn, the story became something smaller and stranger. It was something she told selectively, and only when pressed, usually stripped of most of its details. The badger became an animal. The bell became some weird sound. The man became a guy in the woods. Her friends listened with a mix of fascination and disbelief, the way people listen to the stories on late-night radio shows. "That's so creepy," they would say, eyes wide. "You must have been so scared." She would smile, shrug, change the subject. It was impossible to convey the scale of the fear to someone who had not felt the world shrink to a single, fleeing body, and the sound that followed it she did not want to try. Sometimes, crossing a busy street at dusk, she would hear the jangle of a bicycle bell and feel her stomach drop. Sometimes, in a crowded lecture hall, a door would slam somewhere behind her, and her body would react as though it had just heard a branch break under someone else's weight. Each time, the rational part of her stepped in quickly, handing her the correct interpretation. Bike, door, nothing. It didn't stop the first flinch. At night, in the liminal space between waking and sleep, the scene in the clearing replayed itself with sharp fidelity. The rain, the dull shine of wet trunks, the moment when the tall, dark silhouette stepped into the open and lifted its hands. She always woke just before the bell rang in those dreams. In the real world, there were no more incidents, no missing hikers, no mysterious footprints, no further reports of bells in the forest. The police's unofficial explanation, some disturbed loner scared off by the commotion, or moving on to elsewhere, hardened gradually into the official one. The T-shirt remained in an evidence bag in some drawer. It belonged to no one they could identify. Perhaps, they suggested, it had nothing to do with her experience at all. Years later, Bella would still find herself thinking, on certain cold mornings, of the way the badger's head had been bound to its paws, not just the cruelty of it, the butcher's joke of the pose, but the care, the twine wrapping, the placement at exactly the right height, the decision to wait until she had passed by once before, hoisting it into position. It was not the work of someone acting in wild, disorganized frenzy. It was the work of someone who understood anticipation. That, more than anything else, was what she could not quite place in any neat category of human behavior she had learned about in lectures or read about online. That, and the last thing she saw before she turned to run. The slight tilt of the head, as if the figure were studying her in return, as calmly as she had studied the badger. Whoever he was, the forest had closed around him again when she left. Its trunks and undergrowth made excellent curtains. All you had to do was stand still and let people forget where to look. The woods behind her parents' house went back to their usual business, growing, shedding, sheltering, rotting. Birds nested, foxes hunted, leaves fell, snow came and went. From the town, from the fields, from the safe side of the kitchen window, you would never know that there was a piece of land in there that no one from Bella's family would step onto again. It belonged to someone else now. Whether he still walked there with his bell, whether he ever thought of the girl who had run from him that night, whether he waited for anyone else to find the back way in, those were questions that existed only in the gap between what she knew for certain and what she could feel without proof. The forest, as always, kept its answers. This was Midnight Horror Society, dark curiosity for sleep. Until your next midnight session, sleep well.